Hello, my name is Hallie Rusk, though by the end of tonight you might not find that name anywhere. They said I'd be honored. They said I'd be remembered. But what they really meant was, stand still while we erase you quietly. And I did, for years. Until this night. This moment, when everything they built on my silence began to crack beneath their heels. Now watch closely, because this is the moment the knife lands. The chandelier above me scattered light like shattered glass, too bright, too loud. Cameras clicked like insects around a corpse. The Crescent Hotel smelled of champagne, new contracts, and the sort of perfume that only comes with money. I walked in behind Warden, my husband, though the crowd barely noticed me. They saw him first. They always did. A waiter stopped me before I could follow him to the front. He pointed toward a small table near the wall. Mrs. Rusk, your seat's right here. The placard read, Guest of Mr. Rusk. My chest tightened. Guest, not wife, not partner, just a name attached to a man. I smiled politely, the kind of smile that hurts your teeth, and sat down. From my chair, the world blurred, gold gowns, silver laughter, red wine glinting in crystal glasses. I could hear Warden's voice from the stage, smooth as the marble floor beneath my heels. Tonight, he said, we celebrate legacy, innovation, and partnership. He paused long enough to make sure every lens caught his best angle. My hands stayed folded in my lap. I had helped draft every page of that partnership, yet my name wasn't on a single one. Velda, his mother, sat near the front, pearls glowing under the light. She never turned around, never once acknowledged me. She had a way of making distance feel like punishment. I watched her lift her flute of champagne when Warden finished. Applause erupted. My palms stayed cold. Warden stepped down from the stage, shaking hands, kissing cheeks. When his eyes found mine, his smile faltered for half a second. He walked over, glass of red in hand. I stood, trying to remember how to breathe. You made quite the impression, I whispered. Please, he said under his breath, still smiling for the cameras, don't embarrass us tonight. Something in me cracked, quiet but permanent. Us. I asked, you mean you? He turned toward me, still smiling, his voice smooth. Hallie, not now. I built this with you, I said. My tone was too soft to draw attention, too real to ignore. He lifted his glass slightly. Then you should know when to stop talking. The wine came fast. A red arc, perfectly aimed. It hit my cheek, my neck, my dress. I could smell the iron in it. Gasps fluttered through the room. Someone laughed, nervous, high-pitched. The flash from a camera froze the moment. I didn't move. My skin burned beneath the wine. Velda rose slowly, her heels clicking like judgment. She reached out, her hand brushing a strand of hair from my forehead as if she were comforting me. Then she leaned in. You reek of poverty and failure, she murmured, her tone gentle enough for only me to hear. Her perfume, gardenia and control, filled the space between us. Something inside me went silent. A waiter appeared, trembling, holding out a napkin. I took it, dabbed my cheek, left the stain there on purpose. Across the room, people turned away, pretending not to see. I wanted to scream, to break a glass, to shout that this empire existed because of me, but my voice caught somewhere behind my ribs. The master of ceremonies cleared his throat. Let's continue, shall we? Laughter stumbled back into motion. The pianist began to play again, soft, apologetic. The air smelled of roses and shame. I sat back down. The chair was cold, the label still mocking. Guest of Mr. Rusk. My fingers shook as I folded the napkin, one edge red, the other white. Balance, I thought bitterly. That's what they wanted. Her elegance, his authority, my silence. Warden kept shaking hands, the perfect host. Velda leaned close to a guest and said something that made them laugh. I couldn't hear it, but I felt it. It vibrated through the room, through my bones. A waiter refilled my glass without asking. I stared at the liquid swirling inside, so red, so alive. The room dimmed slightly as the spotlight shifted to the microphone on stage. My name was never called. The rest of the night passed like a play I hadn't auditioned for. I watched my husband smile at investors, his hand resting on Velda's shoulder. I watched people toast to their success, their future. My own reflection shimmered faintly in a silver tray, almost transparent. When it was finally over, the applause faded, leaving a hum of conversation. I stood slowly, the fabric of my dress stiff where the wine had dried. The microphone still waited under the spotlight, untouched. I walked toward it out of instinct, not plan. A guard stepped into my path. Ma'am, the event's concluded. Ma'am, guest, stranger. I looked past him at the microphone. The cord hung loose, coiled like a threat. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words inside me didn't form sentences. They pulsed like a heartbeat. I turned away. Behind me, the spotlight dimmed. The sound of glass clinking echoed down the hall. Warden's laughter, low and practiced, filled the space again. Outside, the night air was cold enough to sting. I breathed it in until my throat hurt. My reflection in the window looked like someone else entirely. Looking back now, I should have seen it coming. They had planned this, rehearsed it even. Every detail, every humiliation. The stain wasn't an accident. It was a message. They didn't just silence me. They rehearsed it. That's where it all started. The music followed me down the hallway, muffled now, as if it had been meant for someone else. I kept walking, even though I had nowhere to go. My heels clicked against the marble like a metronome counting down the seconds until I broke. I didn't. I couldn't afford to. Not yet. When I turned back, I saw it. Every woman in that room wore white, ivory, or gold. I was the only one draped in navy silk. The email had said, "Formal evening wear encouraged." It hadn't said a word about color. Maybe it didn't need to. Maybe they'd all known, and I hadn't been told. Zinnia brushed past me, perfume sharp enough to taste. Didn't get the memo. Huh? She whispered with a smile that wasn't a smile at all. I stared at her, but she was already gone, moving back toward Warden, her hand grazing his arm as if marking territory. That little touch told me more than any confession ever could. My name might still be on the marriage license, but not on his mind. I found my seat again, the one marked guest of Mr. Rusk. The wine had dried on my dress, sticky and cold. The smell clung to me like a warning. The host's voice rose over the chatter. Ladies and gentlemen, before we conclude tonight's signing, we'd like to share a short video celebrating the journey of Rusk Holdings. My stomach twisted. That video had been my project. I had spent weeks gathering photos, editing interviews, crafting the story of how the company came to be. I knew every frame, every sound cue. I stood, smoothing my skirt, ready to approach the stage when it ended. I was supposed to give a short speech about teamwork, something scripted, polished, harmless. The lights dimmed. My heart synced with the rhythm of the first notes. Then I realized this wasn't my video. The logo looked different. The footage flashed through scenes I hadn't chosen, Warden shaking hands, Velda smiling before the press, Zinnia walking through the new building site. My name didn't appear once. My voice wasn't anywhere. A man behind me whispered, "Isn't she the assistant?" Someone laughed softly. Velda leaned closer to them and said, clear enough for half the table to hear, "She's with us, but not one of us." For a second, I couldn't breathe. My throat felt dry, raw, as if the air itself refused to include me. When the lights came back on, applause filled the room. I tried to step forward to the microphone that waited on stage, but before I could speak, the sound system cut. The mic died. Static filled the speakers for a moment, then silence. The host recovered quickly, smiling too wide. "Well, what a beautiful ending. Let's toast to new beginnings." Laughter followed, the kind that hides discomfort, the kind that erases people. I stayed where I was. My palms were slick. My pulse drummed so loudly, I thought others could hear it. Zinnia brushed past again, her voice sweet and poisonous. "You know, Hallie, sometimes it's best to let the professionals handle the talking." I wanted to tell her I was the one who'd written the first business plan when Warden couldn't even balance his own accounts. I wanted to shout that the contract she was celebrating existed because I built the foundation. But the words dissolved before they reached my mouth. If I scream, I thought, it'll prove them right. If I stay silent, they win. The laughter kept rolling like waves. I couldn't stop. I felt like I was drowning in plain sight. I slipped away before the toasts ended. The restroom smelled of lemon cleaner and fear. I locked the door behind me and stared at my reflection under the harsh fluorescent light. The stain on my dress had spread, a dark shadow blooming wider as I tried to wipe it. The more I dabbed, the worse it got. That felt fitting. The cleaner attendant knocked lightly. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I swallowed hard. "Just fine." The lies sounded small even to me. She left without another word. I studied my reflection again. The woman in the mirror didn't look broken or brave, just erased. The eyes looking back weren't mine anymore. They belonged to someone who knew she'd been replaced and didn't yet know how to fight it. When I stepped back into the corridor, the party was still going strong. Glasses clinked. Laughter floated from the ballroom like nothing had happened. Warden stood near the stage, smiling, the perfect husband for the perfect photo. Velda saw me. Her eyes swept over my stained dress and settled on my face. She raised her glass slightly, a smirk curling at the corner of her lips, as if to say, "You should have stayed invisible." I didn't look away. For the first time that night, I didn't flinch. I just turned and walked toward the exit, heels clicking softly, each step heavier but steadier. Outside, the cold air bit into my skin. My hands trembled, but my spine straightened. I looked up at the windows of the ballroom glowing above me and realized something I hadn't allowed myself to think until then. I wasn't left out. I was written out. And whoever was rewriting my story was about to find out I still remembered how to hold the pen. The ballroom had begun to empty when I turned back. Music still played, softer now, like a heartbeat slowly fading. My dress clung to me where the wine had dried, and the scent of it mixed with the perfume of women who'd never had to apologize for existing. I didn't belong there anymore, but something in me refused to leave. A murmur caught my ear near the far wall, laughter, hushed and practiced. I followed it through the corridor of portraits. A golden plaque above the archway read the Rusk family legacy. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I stepped inside. Photographs lined the walls, Christmas parties, ribbon cuttings, charity galas. All immaculate, all posed. There was one of the lake house on Thanksgiving, the photo I had taken myself. Warden had been sitting by the fire, Velda beside him, the lake behind them reflecting the light like a mirror. I remembered that day. The smell of pine, the laughter, the cold air stinging my cheeks. I had been standing right there when the shutter clicked, but I wasn't in the picture. They had cropped me out. I stared at the frame, tracing the edge with my fingertip. They hadn't even hidden the cut well. The left side of the image still showed the faint shadow of my arm. It wasn't just editing. It was a surgical erasure, a decision. Someone behind me chuckled. "Oh, that one's my favorite," said a voice I knew too well. "Zinnia's." I turned. She stood beside Warden, her dress shimmering silver under the light, camera crew orbiting around them. "You three look powerful together," one of the photographers said. Velda placed her hand on Zinnia's back with a motherly smile. Warden said nothing. No one looked for me. No one corrected the lie. The flash went off. The moment was sealed. I felt the air leave my lungs. My fingers twitched, wanting to tear the frame off the wall, to smash the glass. But I didn't move. People like them fed on reactions. They collected them, displayed them, turned them into proof of superiority. So I smiled, just slightly. Then I walked away. My heels clicked down the hallway again. The sound small but steady. Each step echoed through the marble like a reminder. I still existed. As I passed the catering table, I heard Velda's voice, low, smooth, venom-wrapped in silk. "Poor Hallie," she said to a guest. "She means well, but she's just not made for this life. Warden needs someone who gets him, someone who belongs here." The guest murmured something polite. Velda continued, "Zinnia's been such a blessing, so composed, so supportive. She fits." I walked faster before I could let the words sink too deep. At the far end of the hall, a birthday banner from last month still hung above the bar. "Happy 40th. Hallie," in silver script. I almost laughed at how wrong it looked. I remembered that night. Velda had hosted a dinner, her version of kindness. Everyone had brought gifts, crystal, perfume, designer scarves. She'd handed me a small box wrapped neatly in gold paper. Inside was a coupon, 20% off a blender. "It's practical," she'd said, smiling, "just like you." That was the same night Zinnia arrived at our house for a late meeting. Warden had walked her out to her car, talking in low tones. When I'd asked later what they discussed, he said, "Don't start Hallie. She's helping me with PR. You should thank her." I had, like a fool. Now, as the party thinned, Zinnia's laugh floated across the room again, too loud, too familiar. She leaned in toward Warden, brushing an invisible speck from his jacket. He didn't stop her. I turned toward the legacy wall again. The air felt heavy with flowers, and something else, decay disguised as luxury. My pulse pounded in my ears, not from panic this time, but from clarity. They hadn't forgotten me. They were rewriting me line by line, frame by frame, until I disappeared. But I wasn't going to disappear quietly. The exit door was open just enough for me to see the reflection of the ballroom in the glass. I watched Velda, Warden, and Zinnia stand together under the chandelier, smiling for another photographer. It was a perfect picture, a perfect lie. My hands stopped trembling. My breath slowed. I realized then that this wasn't confusion anymore. It was proof. Every cruelty had been deliberate, every omission a page torn out of my story. If they want a world without me, I whispered, I'll show them what it costs. Looking back, that was the moment something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger, it was awakening. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and white noise. My reflection in the windshield kept changing with every turn, sometimes a stranger, sometimes the woman I used to be. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked smaller than I remembered, as if it too had decided to step back from me. I didn't turn on the lights right away. The silence was cleaner in the dark. My phone buzzed in my bag. A notification, persistent. I ignored it once, then again. When it lit up for the third time, I glanced down. The screen read, Financial Wire, breaking news. Concerns arise over key spouse's financial ethics. My chest tightened. The article loaded fast, faster than I could think. My name was there, buried in the second paragraph, painted with suspicion. Sources close to Rusk Holdings claimed discrepancies in prior asset transfers involving Mrs. Hallie Rusk, wife of CEO Warden Rusk. There were screenshots, private documents, my bank records, investment logs, records that had been locked in my personal drive, records that only Warden could have accessed. The byline was anonymous, but the IP trace on the metadata, embedded in the footer of the article, showed his office address. I didn't even need to guess. I remember whispering to the empty room. He used my own numbers to bury me. My voice cracked on the last word. The clock in the hallway ticked once, twice. I could hear my father's voice in memory. Always keep the paper, Hallie. People can lie. Documents don't. I went to the study. The safe still sat in the corner behind the framed photo of my parents. My hands shook only once as I spun the dial. Inside were folders, organized, labeled, deliberate. The one marked joint assets was thinner than it should have been. I pulled the contents out. Half the pages were gone. The remaining documents looked new, reprinted, signed, but not by me. The signatures were forged. Transfer of ownership. My shares, my money, my name moved under Velda's portfolio. The ink smelled fresh. I felt it in my throat like smoke. I sat back in the chair, staring at the mess. So that's how you planned it, I thought. Erase me on paper first. The room swayed slightly. I reached for my phone again and opened the Rusk Holdings website. The banner showed Warden, Velda, and Zinnia cutting the ribbon at the new development. A family enterprise dedicated to legacy. The caption read, I scrolled to the founders section. My name was gone. At the bottom of the page was a single new line, reorganized under the sole leadership of Warden Rusk. I leaned back, staring at those words. Sole leadership. It was almost elegant, simple, final. For a while, I just sat there. The air was thick, the house too quiet. Somewhere outside, A dog barked once and went silent again. When I could finally move, I opened my old laptop, the one Warden had insisted I stop using. I typed his name into the local document search. Hundreds of files appeared, most locked, some archived. One folder caught my eye, Media Prep Confidential. I clicked. Inside were talking points, drafted quotes, and a press release ready to publish. Rusk Holdings distances itself from ongoing financial irregularities tied to spouse. Dated next week. He had scheduled my downfall before the wine ever hit my skin. I stood up so fast the chair hit the wall. My breath came sharp, but my mind was clear. This wasn't betrayal. It was strategy. Every cruel detail, every public humiliation, every edit on a page had been laid out like a business plan. I walked to the living room and sat in my father's old leather chair. The cushion creaked under me the way it used to when he'd work late at night. I could almost hear him saying, "There's always a way to balance the books." I whispered to the empty room. I helped them build a kingdom, and they rewrote the map without me. The truth of it hung in the air. My fingers hovered over the keyboard again. I opened a new file, titled it Reclaim. My pulse steadied. No more confusion. No more waiting for someone to hand me a place at their table. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger wastes time. This was calculation. The night outside was still, heavy with quiet. I could feel the shift inside me, the same way a storm builds before it breaks. Every humiliation had been recorded, every lie documented, and now all that was left was to decide how to use it. I stopped being confused. I started getting ready. 2 days passed before I decided to show up. It wasn't anger that drove me, it was precision. The kind that comes after you've bled out enough shock to leave only calculation behind. I dressed simply, a black blazer, hair pulled back. No jewelry, no perfume. People like them mistake silence for surrender. I intended to remind them that quiet could also mean loaded. When I stepped into the Rusk Holdings lobby, the receptionist froze mid-greeting. "Mrs. Rusk, Mr. Rusk didn't mention you were coming." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm here." I didn't wait for permission. The elevator ride up felt longer than usual, though my reflection in the mirrored walls didn't flinch. I remembered when that building had smelled of promise, new carpet, fresh paint, ambition. Now it smelled sterile, expensive, and hollow. The boardroom doors were closed when I arrived. I could hear muffled voices, Warden's smooth baritone, Velda's clipped vowels. I pushed the handle. Locked. For a second, I considered walking away. Then I knocked, firm enough to cut the conversation inside. A pause. Footsteps. The door cracked open. "Hallie," Velda said, her surprise quickly folding into irritation. "This is a closed meeting." I stepped inside anyway, then open it. Warden's expression flickered between annoyance and fear. He tried to regain control with that polished corporate tone. "You can't just walk in here." "Can't." I smiled thinly. "That word doesn't suit you, Warden. You prefer the ones that end in profit." No one spoke. The projector hummed quietly, its light catching the tension hanging between us. I placed my bag on the table, deliberate, as though setting down a piece of evidence. Velda folded her arms. "Whatever you think you're doing." I interrupted, clarifying. I unlocked my phone and mirrored it to the screen. The email glowed large, and sharp. Make sure her exit looks mutual, clean, final, no paper trail. It was signed by Warden, forwarded by Velda. The silence that followed was thicker than sound. Warden's jaw tightened. Where did you— Your assistant, I said. She accidentally copied me. You might want to train her better. Velda's mask slipped for just a moment. You're twisting context. That was about restructuring. Restructuring my life? I asked quietly. Reassigning my shares? Publishing lies about me in the press? If this is business, then I finally understand what kind you run. Warden rubbed his temple, sighing as though I were the problem. Hallie, this isn't the place. I stepped closer. I built the first financial model for this company on our dining table. I helped write the pitch that landed your first investors. You used my numbers, my contacts, and then, when it worked, you deleted my name. Velda's tone sharpened. You're overreacting. You signed those transfers willingly. Under duress, I said. Under you? The words landed heavier than I expected. Her mouth opened, then closed. I reached into my bag again and placed a red-tabbed folder on the table. That's a preliminary injunction. It names both of you. Warden leaned forward. Hallie, you're not thinking straight. I met his gaze. I've never thought clearer. He laughed once, hollow. You wouldn't survive in this field alone. You need us. It was almost funny how small his confidence sounded in daylight. You built your empire on what I gave you. I said, I don't need to survive in your field. I just have to make sure you can't survive in mine. Velda exhaled sharply. You're threatening your own family. No, I said. I'm reminding them I exist. For a moment, none of them moved. The hum of the air conditioner filled the room. A paperweight glinted beside Velda's elbow, the company logo engraved on its side. I remembered the day it was made. Warden had said, it's solid enough to crush something if needed. The irony wasn't lost on me now. I gathered the folder again, slid it back into my bag. I haven't acted yet, but if you force my hand, it won't be quiet. Velda's eyes narrowed. Is that a threat? It's a forecast, I said, and I'm never wrong with numbers. As I turned toward the door, Warden's voice followed me. You're making a mistake. Hallie, walk away now, and maybe we can fix this. I stopped, hand on the handle. You already fixed it, I said. You just didn't think I'd notice how. Then I left. The elevator doors closed on the sound of their silence, a silence that finally belonged to them, not me. Walking out through the lobby, I caught my reflection in the glass once more. The same face, the same eyes, but the weight behind them had changed. I wasn't waiting for justice anymore. I was preparing to deliver it. This was their last invitation to do the right thing. The morning after the boardroom confrontation, I woke before sunrise. The house was still dark, the air heavy with that quiet that comes before consequence. My laptop sat open on the desk, a soft glow in the corner of my father's office. I hadn't slept much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Warden's face when I laid the folder on the table, his certainty cracking for the first time. The phone buzzed once, then again. A message from Darcy. You need to see this. Check your email. I clicked the link she'd sent. The subject line read, Rusk, Family Trust, Amendment Draft. The document opened slowly as if dragging through mud. It was a scanned legal memo, Velda's signature, Warden's beneath it. They were petitioning to revise Reuben Knox's trust, the inheritance my father had left me, to void my rights through a discrepancy clause. In their words, I was no longer in alignment with the family's ethical image. I stared at the text until the words blurred. For a moment, I couldn't tell if the shaking I felt was rage or heartbreak. Maybe both. Darcy called. "I'm so sorry, Hallie. I don't know how they thought they'd get away with this. The leak came from someone in their firm." My voice came out steady. "Then they've already lost control of their own lives." I didn't cry. I didn't even curse. I reached for my phone and called my attorney. "File a hold on my father's estate documents." I said, "Every clause, every signature. Nothing gets amended without my approval." He hesitated. "Mrs. Rusk, are you anticipating a legal dispute?" "Not anticipating," I said, "acknowledging." After I hung up, I opened a folder labeled Black Elm Capital. My cursor hovered over a draft email I'd prepared months ago, back when I'd still believed Warden could change. It contained one command, a clause my father had taught me to include when we'd first invested in Warden's company. Breach of ethics nullifies partnership. It was my insurance policy, the only part of my name they hadn't stolen. I typed a new subject line. Activate exit clause, breach confirmed. Then, without a pause, I hit send. The sound was small, but it felt like thunder. I went to the window. The first light of morning crawled across the horizon, pale and slow. Somewhere downtown, I imagined Velda pouring her coffee, perfectly certain the world still belonged to her. That certainty was about to fracture. By noon, the news broke. Trident Infrastructure cancels $900 million partnership with Rusk Holdings. The headline read, I could almost hear the panic rising from their tower like smoke. Calls began flooding in, unknown numbers, investors, journalists. I didn't answer. I made tea instead. Warden called 3 times before leaving a message. His voice was tight, almost trembling. Hallie, we need to talk. You don't understand what you've done. People will lose jobs. This isn't you. I laughed once, quietly. It's exactly me, I whispered to no one. By evening, a courier arrived at the door, carrying a thick envelope. I signed for it without speaking. Inside was a legal notice, a cease and desist order drafted by Warden's firm. They were accusing me of breach of marital confidentiality and interference with business operations. I smiled. My reply was already waiting for them. That night, I printed out every article, every bank record, every digital signature they'd forged. I highlighted the proof of financial manipulation, the transfers to Velda's account, the fake amendments. I placed it all into a manila envelope. On top, I wrote his name in ink, Warden Rusk. On the front of the folder, I added a yellow sticky note. The handwriting was calm, almost elegant. You married into my legacy. You can die with yours. The next morning, I called for a courier and sent it to his office. When the door closed behind the deliverman, I sat back in my father's old chair. The same one where he used to tell me that power without integrity is just theft in a better suit. The leather was worn, the cushion uneven. It grounded me. The television hummed in the background. News anchors were scrambling to explain the sudden contract collapse. Analysts speculated about internal corruption, mismanagement, ethical violations. Velda's name flashed across the ticker, followed by Warden's. Their empire had begun to shake. I exhaled, slow and deliberate. The noise of the world outside grew distant. All I could hear was the rhythm of my own breath and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. For years, they had dictated my pace, what to say, how to move, when to stay silent. Now, for the first time, the silence belonged to me, and I would use it. I didn't pick up when Warden called again. I didn't respond when Velda's assistant emailed me, begging for a private conversation. The world had started asking them the questions they had once thrown at me. When the day was nearly over, I opened my notebook. The ink of the last sentence gleamed faintly in the lamplight. Justice doesn't need volume, just proof. I set the pen down, folded my hands, and closed my eyes. My heart was racing, but my mind was clear. They thought they could break me clean. I shattered back. I didn't expect it to happen this fast. 24 hours. That's all it took for the headlines to shift from speculative whispers to wildfire. I sat at my father's desk again. Same chair, same soft leather cushion molded to memory. The television in the corner buzzed with static, then snapped to life. Breaking. Rusk Holdings faces internal ethics crisis after $900 million contract collapse. They had spent years building a fortress on image, a last name polished until it glistened. Now it cracked on national television. The segment cut to Velda standing at a press conference like she was preparing for sainthood. Pearl earrings, a pale blue blazer, and the kind of sorrow only rehearsed women wear well. "It's been a difficult few days," she said, hands folded at the podium. "We've been blindsided by betrayal from someone who once called this family her own." I blinked once, twice. She continued. What was shared with the press was stolen. Hallie Rusk has struggled emotionally in recent years. We hope to support her through it, but unfortunately, she chose to damage the family instead. My jaw clenched so tight, I felt it in my temples. Zinnia stood beside her, eyes downcast in performative sympathy. No Warden. Not this time. I wondered if he'd finally run out of courage, or if they'd simply decided he was no longer the clean face of the brand. Jealousy, Velda added, can be a dangerous thing. I muted the screen. Darcy called that afternoon. "You sure you're okay going on camera?" she asked. "They're trying to frame this as a meltdown." "I'm not going on to argue," I said. "I'm going on to remind people what truth sounds like when it stops asking for permission." We recorded the segment in a quiet studio, no audience, no makeup chair. Just me, Darcy, and the soft click of a camera coming to life. She opened with one question. "Why now?" I breathed in slow, because I let myself believe silence was grace, that if I just kept showing up, kept supporting, kept loving despite being erased, eventually they'd remember I existed. But they didn't forget. They deleted me. Darcy said nothing. She didn't have to. I continued, voice even. Power built on silence is fragile, and when silence becomes expected, truth has to scream. We didn't mention names. We didn't have to. She cued the screenshots, emails, account transfers, timestamped documents, everything that had been done behind my back, in my name, without my consent. Legal experts reviewed the files. Each one confirmed. Real, verifiable, intentional. That night it aired. By morning, the collapse had begun. Warden was suspended from his position pending investigation. The SEC opened a probe. Velda was removed from the Board of Trustees by a unanimous vote. Zinnia's PR firm lost its top-tier clients, 3 in the span of a single hour. My inbox flooded with messages, some angry, some apologetic, most silent. Silence, I had learned, was often the loudest acknowledgement of guilt. But I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I walked into the shareholder meeting unannounced. It was closed door, invitation only. But my presence required no invite anymore. The room quieted when I entered. Warden looked up, paler than I'd ever seen him. Velda sat rigid, her jaw like concrete. "I'm not here to rehash anything," I said. "I just want to say one thing." I walked to the table, placed a glass of water in front of Warden, untouched, crystal clear. He stared at it, then up at me. "Hallie, we can undo this. Just talk to me. We can fix it." I didn't sit. This was never about revenge. This was about remembering I existed. His mouth opened, but I'd already turned. I walked out, the sound of my heels the only thing echoing behind me. Looking back now, I see it clearly. They wanted me silent. They wanted me erased. I became the pen. It had been 1 week since the empire fell silent. The air in Dallas felt different, cleaner somehow, as if even the city was relieved that the Rusks had finally run out of ways to lie. I sat across from my lawyer in his office, the faint hum of the air conditioner the only sound between us. The papers on the desk were crisp and heavy. He pushed them toward me with quiet satisfaction. "It's finalized," he said. "You retain your father's trust, all of your original investments, and full legal rights to your name." I signed the last page slowly, almost reverently. Each stroke of ink was a burial of fear, of compromise of that quiet woman who once waited to be spoken for. "What about him?" I asked. He leaned back. Warden waived his claims. Entirely. He didn't contest anything. He didn't even ask for visitation of any jointly held property. That sounded like him. When he couldn't win, he withdrew. Control was his currency. And once it lost value, he abandoned the table. When I left the building, the heat pressed down like truth. A few reporters waited by the curb, their questions rising above the sound of traffic. "Mrs. Rusk, any statement? Will you be speaking publicly?" I smiled faintly. "I already did." I said, "You just haven't heard it yet." That evening, I drove toward the university auditorium, the one where my father used to lecture about ethics in finance. I'd gone there as a girl, sitting in the back row, doodling on his notes while he spoke about integrity like it was a living thing. He always said, "Numbers don't build legacies, actions do." The same hall now carried a red TEDx banner. My name wasn't on the poster, just guest speaker. Legacy and leadership. That was enough. Backstage, a technician clipped a small microphone to my collar. "You ready, Mrs. Knox?" he asked, using my maiden name without knowing what it meant to me. "Yes," I said. "For the first time, I am." The lights dimmed. The crowd quieted. My pulse matched the rhythm of their waiting. When I stepped onto the stage, it wasn't nerves I felt, it was peace. I didn't start with a greeting. I started with a question. What does erasure look like when it's dressed as respect? The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was attentive, real. When people want to make you disappear, they don't do it by shouting, I said. They do it by rewriting. They replace your name with theirs, your work with their stories, your worth with their comfort. And if you're not careful, you start helping them. A murmur rippled through the room. I could see the reflections of cell phone screens catching light, people typing notes, some with tears pooling quietly in the corners of their eyes. My father left me one thing. I continued, clicking to the next slide. Not money, not advice, a clause, hidden in every contract he ever wrote. The screen filled with a single sentence. Integrity is the only asset that appreciates over time. I let it sit there. Then I said, he didn't write that so I'd survive. He wrote it so I'd remember what not to become. A faint sound carried from the back of the auditorium. A chair creaking, someone shifting. I didn't need to look. I knew who it was. Velda. And beside her, Warden, smaller somehow under the weight of what he'd built and lost. For a second, I let my gaze drift over the audience, but never toward them. I wanted them to feel what I had lived through, the power of being unseen. I stand here not as a victim of silence, I said, but as someone who learned how to make silence work for her. Applause rose slowly like a tide. I didn't bow. I simply stepped back from the podium, nodded once, and walked off stage. Behind the curtain, the noise softened again, leaving only the pulse of my heartbeat and the cool air from the vents above. I exhaled deeply, the kind of exhale that feels like years leaving your body. As I walked down the hallway, I passed 2 empty chairs near the exit, the ones reserved for press. Both unclaimed, both tagged Rusk Holdings. A fitting metaphor, I thought. Outside, the night was cool, the parking lot bathed in gold light from the street lamps. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. A message from Darcy. They're saying it's the most powerful talk of the year. I typed back, it wasn't a talk. It was a reminder. Looking back now, I realized something simple but undeniable. Justice doesn't always arrive in thunder. Sometimes it whispers. And this time, they heard it. The silence was a different kind now. Not heavy like it used to be. Not something I had to carry. It settled around the house like a quiet that chose me, not the other way around. 2 weeks had passed since the TEDx talk. My life had narrowed by choice. No press, no inbox floods, no calls from lawyers or former allies suddenly eager to make peace. I didn't want to relive the noise. I wanted the space to hear myself again. The house I moved into wasn't grand. It didn't echo with emptiness or reek of legacy, just clean walls, secondhand furniture, and a kettle that whistled every morning at 7. On the shelf above the kitchen counter sat my father's old mug, faded lettering, the handle chipped. Each morning, I brewed 2 cups of tea out of habit, one for me, one for no one. I placed them both on the table, always forgetting and then remembering, then slowly drinking just one. I didn't keep any photos from the Rusk years, not even from the early days when I thought I was building something permanent, but my father's chair made the move. I set it by the window in the corner of the living room. From there, I could watch the birds land on the fence line and the mailman walk past without looking up. That's what stayed. That's what left. One afternoon, I opened a folder labeled Drafts. There it was, an email to Warden, never sent. I didn't hate you. I'd written, I hated who I became trying to keep you. I read it twice, then closed the laptop. Some things weren't meant to be delivered. Some truths only needed to be said in the quiet corners of yourself. The knock on the door came just after 4. I wasn't expecting anyone. She was young, barely out of her 20s. Her hair was pulled into a loose knot, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion, the kind that isn't from lack of sleep, but from trying to be heard in rooms that never planned to listen. She didn't introduce herself at first, just stood there, holding the strap of her bag, like it was the last thing tethering her to this moment. "They said you might understand," she said. Her voice was soft but splintered. "I don't even know what I'm looking for." I stepped aside. "Then you're exactly where you need to be." She sat across from me, but I didn't press her. No questions. No recounting of trauma. I walked to the bookshelf and pulled down a plain, leather-bound journal. No branding. No lock. Just empty pages waiting. I slid it across the table. "Start here," I said. She looked at it like it was a lifeline disguised as paper. I knew that feeling too well. Later that week, I went to the community center. I had signed up as a volunteer months ago, but hadn't gone since. The building smelled of chalk and old carpet, and the bulletin board by the door had flyers for free meals and poetry readings taped up in layers. I wasn't there to speak, just to help, restack books, serve soup, listen when needed. I didn't offer stories about myself, but people knew. That kind of knowing doesn't come from tabloids. It comes from shared silence. One small girl couldn't have been older than 10. She approached me while I was shelving donated coats. Her eyes were wide, her voice careful. "Are you the lady from the screen?" I smiled. "Maybe." She hesitated, then asked, "What do you do when people stop seeing you?" I knelt down to her level. My voice didn't shake. "You see yourself louder." She nodded like she understood something bigger than words. I handed her a coat. It was 2 sizes too big, but she hugged it like it fit. That night, I sat by the window again, the mug of tea steamed gently in my hand, the other one still full beside it. I watched the moon rise slowly over the rooftops. There were no more calls, no more trials, no more stories to tell, just the echo of a name they tried to bury. Some names aren't carved in marble, but they echo longer in silence. Sometimes the loudest justice is the one spoken in stillness. Not every name ends up carved in stone, but some names, whispered in truth, outlast the monuments. So tell me, have you ever been erased in a room you helped build? Let's talk about it in the comments. And if Hallie's story moved something in you, subscribe for more. Because the next story might just be yours.